episode 279 of Late Night Linux, recorded on the 22nd of April 2024. I'm Joe, and with me are Graham.
Good evening.
Will.
Hello.
And Popey.
Yes, hello.
Hello, thanks for coming back.
No problem.
I didn't mention at the beginning last time that you are from Linux Matters, and people should check that out at linuxmatters.sh.
Yes, they should.
Right, let's do Voice of the Masses. Now, the question this time was, what's the best non-mainstream Linux distro? And we'll link to the Mastodon thread. There were quite a few replies for this. So before we get into people's replies, what even is a non-mainstream distro?
Anything that's not Ubuntu?
I was going to say the same.
I'd say Ubuntu, Debian, Fedora, Arch. Everything else is non-mainstream.
If you're thinking numbers, I would say Fedora, Arch, Ubuntu, Zorin, Mint.
SUSE?
No. Maybe Red Hat.
What about Nix?
Who?
Never heard of it.
We got surprisingly few people saying that, and I don't know if that is because it's just not the best non-mainstream distro, or the people who use it think it is a mainstream distro. But what about Ubuntu? That is basically Ubuntu, but because it's got XFCE, it's a flavor of Ubuntu. Does that mean it's non-mainstream?
No, I think Ubuntu's mainstream. The important bits are built on Ubuntu.
Yeah, the security, the kernel, all that sort of stuff. I think definitely Fedora. There's no doubt that Fedora is mainstream. And I think that OpenSUSE is mainstream, even if it's not hugely well used. I think it definitely does. And Arch, I think, as well.
Definitely.
I don't know about Gentoo. I mean, was that once mainstream? Probably not ever. Graham, this was your question. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I agree with the way the conversation's going. All of those big distributions that have often been around for a long time, they're well established. I mean, SUSE is used in some major companies and banks in Germany. It's worth a lot of money, so it has to be mainstream. I think I broadly agree. I mean, there's no strict definition, is there? Arch still seems wrong to be a mainstream distro, but that's just my age probably. But it is undoubtedly part of every conversation that you see with people discussing distributions.
When every other person in the street has a mohawk and leather and chains, and you realise punk has gone mainstream, you'll have to change to something else, Graham.
Yeah, maybe Gen 2 now.
Yeah.
Well, Stefan said NixOS because once a coworker gave us an hour-and-a-half lecture on it, and I still didn't understand how it works.
I get that every day from Martin at the office.
That's what I thought, yeah. So Mag37 said, I was going to say EndeavourOS, but according to DistroWatch, that seems hella mainstream nowadays. Didn't know it was that popular. Well, okay. DistroWatch means nothing. It's completely irrelevant as to the actual user numbers of distros.
Well, is it though?
Yes, it's bullshit.
I love the way this triggers this kind of response now. It's almost as boring as people saying DistroWatch is the number one list of distros. For decades we've been saying this. It doesn't matter. Who cares?
Yeah, but I don't know why people just think that what's popular on DistroWatch. I mean, Popey, you have been over this on shows that we've recorded over the years. It's a measure of distros with shit SEO, essentially.
I've written a blog post about it. You can link to it in the show notes and then we can stop talking about it.
Right. Okay. I'll have to remember to do that. Right. Some idiot called Popey said Clonezilla. It's a dependable, up-to-date product that is very underrated, does exactly what it sets out to do and no more.
Yeah, I think it's a distro and I don't think you'd consider it mainstream. It's a very specific use case, but it's just one of those tools that you stick on a USB key and use whenever you need it.
Well, Exu said G-Parted Live and Untouched Wagons said System Rescue CD. And I put these all together as tools, but not necessarily distros. I suppose they are distributed and it is an OS, so it does technically count. But to me, I don't see them as distros. They're more just toolkits.
Who died and made you arbiter of what is and isn't a distro?
I don't know.
Was George Castro not available for this episode?
And Sam said Kali Linux isn't necessarily the best, but it's certainly an important one, so it deserves an honourable mention. And Kali's kind of in there with those tools, isn't it? It's more of a tool than it is a distro. And Polly T said Porteous again. I suppose that's a little bit different, but they're all just tools rather than general purpose distros. But I suppose they are still distros.
What's Porteous? I've never heard of it.
It's a kiosk distro.
Oh.
I like it when these distros do something other than another distribution of open source software. I like it, like cubes, I think it's fascinating, and things that have a specific purpose built on the same foundations. It's a new take on things, and I think that's what's so interesting about some of these answers. Popey nailed it with Clonezilla. That's a great choice.
Yeah, Zleet said cubes. And again, yeah, it's distros with an actual reason to be rather than just we changed the wallpaper.
Yeah, exactly. Although there's a place for that as well. I mean, it's the same with like Ubuntu Studio and putting all the kind of audio software in one place. That's a bit more than just a flavor.
I think it boils down to how much effort is put into creating the thing. Like if all you did is run a utility that unpacks the ISO, shove a few things in and repack the ISO, that doesn't feel worthy. But that's unfair, because to some people that is a tremendous amount of work. Like that was a learning exercise for them. As much as I hate the proliferation of distros, someone somewhere got something out of doing that, and they enjoyed themselves while doing it and created something. And the fact they created something, whether it has value in 5 years or 10 years is not for us to say, but it had value to that person.
Well, Jezra said OpenWRT, or is it OpenWrt? Again, that is a distro with a very specific purpose of being a router.
And has its own packaging format. At least last time I looked at it, it did. I think that's a good call. I'm a big fan of OpenWRT.
Is that mainstream? There's an awful lot of routers with it installed.
I think it counts as not mainstream, because I bet there's a lot fewer than there are Ubuntu installs out there.
Do you think?
Yeah.
And there are people who will just install Ubuntu and then configure IP tables.
Right, but not on a tiny router that's got a crappy little CPU and a tiny amount of storage. You're not going to put Ubuntu on a Netgear WNDR 3100 or whatever it is. They're just too small. And so you need something tiny and bespoke like this, or what's that BSD thing that does routing? Smoothwall, that kind of thing. These are appliance distributions, but they're general purpose. You could put them on any hardware.
Yeah.
Well, a limited set.
Oh, which makes me think OpenELEC. That could be a good call.
Ooh.
Yeah, just enough OS to run Kodi, I think is their tagline.
Again, how do you measure mainstream? Because Raspbian and OpenELEC and the other ones that come up as some of the defaults in the Raspberry Pi imager, you think of all the schools just in the UK and how many students have been exposed to that software. It's a lot. And then beyond the UK in other countries as well. There's a ton of people who have been exposed to these allegedly non-mainstream distros.
But does it count as mainstream if it's installed on a lot of hardware, but that hardware's sitting in a drawer?
Or only out for science lesson in the second half of a Tuesday.
Yeah. Well, Martin said, I love the beautifully minimal, nerdy design of Crunchbang Linux, which continues as Crunchbang++. And MD said, Bunsen Labs Linux breathed new life into my old 32-bit HP Mini. I think that is a classic case of a non-mainstream desktop Linux distro that serves a really specific function of shitty old hardware.
Yeah, I still have it installed on an old Intel Classmate computer from the past that's about the same kind of era as the old EPCs, and it was perfect for that. The design that Phil did on Crunchbang, the minimalist, like black and white, having the keyboard shortcuts on the screen in the wallpaper, and just the right amount of stuff installed. It was fantastic. I think he did a really bang-up job of that.
Well, we had some jokers, like Christian said Hannah Montana Linux. And he also mentioned Bebian, which I assume is Justin Bieber Linux. And Stephen said, this one's for Graham. One of my favorite distros of all time successfully attempted to bring a fully functional desktop with all the apps to CentOS 6. It was stellar and it was glorious. The best desktop enterprise Linux distro of all time.
Oh, and still is.
It's just the best server distro of today, isn't it, Graham?
Oh, it really is. Yeah. It's so secure.
So clearly Adam Pig has got a sock puppet account called Arthur because that person said Sailfish OS, clearly. And Linux on Mobile said Postmarket OS. Because if you consider the mobile Linux side of things, that's some real non-mainstream Linux distros right there. And Mike said Diet Pi, which originally was for the Raspberry Pi, but now supports all sorts of different boards and I think x86 as well. Steve said, with the mention of Mike Saunders in the recent past, a deep cut selection would be macOS.
Ooh, that's a good one, but not Linux. But yes, all praise macOS. Although I'm also surprised that, and I'm gratified that no one put, I'd just like to interject for a moment on what we're referring to as Linux.
Well, Stig did say ReactOS is also a cool distro, but that it does not count.
If macOS is allowed in there, Temple OS is allowed as well.
And more recently, Serenity OS, which is completely ground up and they're even making their own browser engine. It's not Linux, but I think that deserves an honorable mention. All right, well, Mike said ASCII Linux. That's definitely not mainstream, but it is definitely really cool.
I am talking to you from ASCII right now.
Oh, well, it's definitely mainstream then.
Yes, it's mainstream in my house.
And John said WSL Ubuntu. I would argue that that is a mainstream distro because there's probably more people using that than desktop Linux.
Yeah, that's the uncomfortable, probable fact, is it probably has more than all of the, in inverted commas, mainstream distros added together.
What a lovely, depressing note to end this segment on.
That's success, isn't it?
No, it is. I think it's success. A lot of people would disagree. Thankfully, Phelim is not here to disagree, but it is success. It's a weird success, but I think we have to take it nonetheless.
And isn't Llama 3 wonderful?
Only if you run it on AWS. Okay, this episode is sponsored by people who support us with PayPal and Patreon. Go to latenightlinux.com/support for details of how you can support us too. Patreon supporters have the option to listen to episodes without ads like this. And it's not just this show. There's 2.5 admins about system administration, Linux Matters for upbeat, family-friendly adventures, Linux After Dark for silly challenges and philosophical debates, Linux Dev Time about developing with and for Linux, Hybrid Cloud Show for everything public and private cloud, and Ask the Hosts for off-topic questions from you. You can even get some episodes a bit early. We've got a lot going on, and it's only possible because of the people who support us. So, if you like what we do and can afford it, it would be great if you could support us too at latenightlinux.com/support. Let's do some discoveries then. Will, MapSCII. This is an ASCII map in your terminal.
Yeah, I think I found this via Colin King on Mastodon, I think. The initial look at it, I thought, yeah, fine, whatever. This is just a novelty. But you can try it out without installing it. You can telnet to mapsci.me and try it out live in your terminal, and it is eerily good. It supports the mouse, and you can zoom in and out with your mouse wheel. It's scarily good. The closer you zoom in, you can get down to street level. It's all built on OpenStreetMap, so if it exists on OpenStreetMap, it exists here. And it's quite fast. Well, it's extremely fast and scarily good. I didn't think I'd be very impressed by it, but I was wrong. It's amazing, and I love it. And you should all try it.
I'm trying it now. I thought I had to piss around with NPM. I didn't realize I could just telnet into it. This is really cool.
Yeah, this has been around for a while. It's like the old blinking lights and, watch Star Wars in your terminal if you telnet to a certain address. It's been around a little while, and every so often it does the rounds and pops up again and again and again. And every time I see it, I am wowed by how amazing people can coerce a terminal to do pretty and useful stuff like this, but also how I will never actually use it for its intended purpose. I will only use it to be amazed at what you can do with a terminal.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It doesn't have a practical application, but it's fine because it's just fun.
Graham, Descent 3.
So yeah, I sound so old saying this, but Descent 3 was a video game from the early 2000s. And there was a Linux version of Descent 3. So Descent was this remarkable game that I think originally appeared in the 90s. And it was a kind of It's like Doom, but they would say with 6 degrees of freedom, which meant that it wasn't just running left and right and forwards and back. There was an up and down element to it as well. And you flew through tunnels, basically, through asteroids and fought off robots that had artificial intelligence. And there was a great co-op and 2-player game version of it as well. And Descent 3 was one of the first ones built specifically for Linux. And I can remember it being like a revolution at the time. There was like an outside world. It was a great game, but a little bit unfinished. And one of the developers who originally worked on Descent 3 for Linux has been able to release the source code for that original game, plus a patch that they worked on in 2008 to try and make it more modern as a genuine open source dump of code on GitHub. So there are already Windows, macOS and Linux builds of this, and it looks like this has only just kind of happened in the last couple of weeks. There's already a really active community that are modernizing what is still a brilliant old classic.
Do you still have to have the game files, or does it have any assets?
That's a really good question. Thank you for asking it, because it doesn't include the assets, which is a real shame. I mean, with these, there's usually like a demo version of the game you can get to get some of the assets out legitimately. And of course, I think it's still available on Steam to buy. So
£6.99.
So, I mean, you could get them that way. In fact, some of the original developers actually went on to create Later Overload, which I've talked about before on the Steam Deck, which is a very modern version of Descent. But nothing will beat those old Descent 3 levels.
So, Popey, you and Will went to a nuclear power station recently.
Again, yes.
So this has not really got much to do with Linux, but it is cool nonetheless.
Yes. So 8 years ago, or thereabouts, Will, I, and our good friend Stuart Langridge went to 2 nuclear power stations in the course of a weekend and some other fun stuff in a Jolly Boys weekend away. We went to Dungeness and Sizewell nuclear power stations in the UK. And recently, Will got invited to Sizewell again for an extra special VIP tour by a guy called Dave Allen, not that one, who works there at the training facility. And Will kindly invited myself, Stuart, and another chap who works with Will. And we all went over there at the weekend just gone.
Yeah, Dave, who is a long-time listener. So hello, Dave. Thank you for this.
Yes.
Thank you, Dave.
We didn't really know what to expect, to be honest, when we got there. And Dave came out and met us, took us inside, and I will just gush immediately and say, if you get an opportunity to go and see the training centre at Sizewell B, or any nuclear power station probably, it's jolly good fun. If you're the kind of nerd who listens to this show, you're probably the kind of nerd. There's probably a Venn diagram overlap there of people who will be excited by all the buttons, switches, dials, and other nuclear paraphernalia that you get inside this training centre. It's just fabulous. It's a replica of the real control room, down to they've taken photographs of the doors and printed out the door, as it were, and stuck it on the wall so that when people are doing training in this simulator, they're fully immersed in the whole experience of, yes, I really am in the real control room kind of thing. And they have all the same controls in that room as they do in the real control room. And Dave was kind enough to go round the room. It's a fairly sizable room with lots of knobs and switches and dials and controls from decades ago, and showed us how it all works, and then ran the simulator and showed us what happens when you do adverse things like hit the stop button and crash the reactor. And it's just a jolly, jolly good day out.
Well, I have rediscovered Endeavour OS. This is such an easy way to install Arch. If you just want to have Arch up and running in a few minutes with everything just a GUI and no having to mess around with the usual Arch installer, which to be fair these days is very easy, this is what you want to do, I reckon. If you connect the installer to the internet, then you've got a choice of loads of different desktops, and it all looks nice and is coherent. And then once you've got it installed, to update it, there's a button on the menu, and that just opens a terminal and runs the relevant commands. There's no messing around. It's super fast if you want to run Arch.
So being brutally honest, how does it compare to the Ubuntu desktop installer, the default one?
Broadly similar, I would say.
Isn't it calamaris?
Yeah, I think so. So it's, slightly different in details, but roughly similar in experience, I would say.
And do you have to go and read the Arch news every time you update, or can you confidently update the thing and not worry about some key being missing or DNS breaking or whatever other weird stuff happens sometimes?
I don't know yet is the honest answer to that because I've only just put it on my laptop for the first time in ages. My understanding is that it is fairly vanilla Arch just with some value add. So probably, yes, you are going to run into those same things. But it's Arch. What do you expect? I mean, Graham, you just laugh in expert at Arch installer or whatever at this. You would never think to using a GUI to install it.
Oh, it's actually been quite a long time since I installed Arch from fresh.
Oh, yeah, because it just works so well, yeah.
I still have to save it every so often. So I don't know. I enjoy the part of learning. It kind of reminds me how it all fits together, which is why I do it. I hope not to be just a smug Arch user.
I suppose that is true. If you take the sport out of it, then you don't really know how to fix it when it goes wrong, potentially.
And it teaches you, which I find interesting. It's an arduous task in reinstalling anything, but I enjoy it if I'm learning something at the same time, and Arch has been that for me. But it has been a while.
I have to say, whenever I see mention of modern Arch flavors, or whatever you want to call respins, or whatever they're called, Endeavour seems to be the one that most people are talking about and seem to appreciate. So yeah, it must be doing something right.
I've also got a very quick YouTube channel recommendation. Stez Sticks Fix. It's a terrible name. I'll link it in the show notes. It's a fella, I think from Manchester from his accent, who takes knackered electronics and fixes them. He gets it under a microscope and changes tiny capacitors with his heat gun and soldering iron. It is brilliantly relaxing. It's the kind of thing that either you're going to just really love to just have it wash over you, or you're going to be like, this is like watching paint dry. What the fuck? So it's not for everyone, but if you enjoy seeing a Bluetooth speaker taken apart and diagnosed, and then, okay, it turns out this capacitor is shorting, and this capacitor is like less than the size of a grain of rice. And then he gets his heat gun on it and flux and everything, takes it off the board and then replaces it and then powers it all back up, and then it works. It is a brilliant YouTube channel. Asterisk, apart from his terrible raps while he takes the thing apart. But that's his way of thanking all the patrons, and he does put timestamps to skip through that. So fair play to him on that one.
I've been watching his channel for a while. Like, I dip in and out, like when there's an interesting device that he's repairing. And with a lot of repair videos, you can see the progress they've made over time. Like if you've watched for a while, you can see how they were using rudimentary tools and techniques in order to fix stuff. I haven't found that with this guy. He seems to know what he's doing, and he's got a lot of really decent tools and equipment. And I find he generally gets stuff fixed. And so it's quite satisfying by the I don't think I'm spoiling anything by saying he generally fixes stuff.
Yeah.
And so by the end of the video, he's got a working device. And I think it's quite rewarding.
Is he the guy that had about 20 robotic vacuums going around his house at one time?
I don't think I've seen that.
Maybe I'm thinking of somebody else.
But he's only got like 150,000 subscribers, which seems like not very many for someone who's doing something so, at least to me, interesting. Maybe it's just very niche. I don't know.
And it's not even his day job. This is like a hobby. From what I understand, he's got a Patreon and no doubt gets a bit of revenue from that, I'm sure, which is, extra pocket money and stuff. But I don't think this is his day job. I think his day job, he works in a bar or something. It's not anything like this, which I think is like, it's really cool that he gets to show off his hobby on YouTube. It's really great.
Right, well, we better get out of here then. Thank you again, Popey, for joining us. It's been great having you the last couple of weeks.
You're welcome.
And remember, linuxmatters.sh if you want to hear more from Popey. We'll be back next week when it'll probably be news and stuff, and probably Phelan will be back, but we'll have to see. Until then, I've been Joe.
I've been Graham.
I've been Will.
And I've been Alan.
See you later.